You wake up in a small windowless chamber. The air is thick, sour with the stench of sweat, fear, and the faint tang of olive oil spilled long ago. The stone beneath your body is cold, pressing against your bare skin like the embrace of a tomb. From somewhere distant, muffled laughter drifts across marble halls. A sound too light, too carefree, too cruel for this place. That laughter makes your stomach twist, because you know it isn't meant for joy. It's a signal, a reminder that you are property waiting to be used. Bruises bloom across your ribs, spreading in sickly shades of purple and yellow grotesque flowers on a body that no longer feels like yours. The iron shackle around your ankle bites deep into raw flesh. Dried blood clings to it, flaking off whenever you shift. You hear the footsteps, then slow, deliberate sandals, striking marble. You know the sound before you see him, the overseer. He fills the doorway like a shadow, come to life, a mountain of scarred muscle, a face carved by cruelty and years spent breaking young bodies. His voice growls low, without even the courtesy of malice. Clean yourself, a damp cloth drops at your feet with a slap. The master has guests tonight. Important guests, you'll help entertain them. His eyes sweep over you, cold measuring like a horse trader assessing livestock. Your throat tightens. You know exactly what this means. You've known since the first night they dragged you screaming from your village, since the day your family's debts were paid, in the only coin left your body, and you are not alone. You never were. This was the reality for countless young men in ancient Greece. Though their stories have been buried beneath marble myths, we are taught of Socrates, questions, Pericles' democracy, Homer's poetry. We are told of temples rising like frozen hymns, of philosophers debating virtue beneath painted porticos. Yet behind those bright images hides the shadow. A world that consumed its vulnerable and discarded them like shards of broken pottery. Slavery in Greece was not an accident. It was the foundation. It was what allowed free men to debate, to create, to dream. Their leisure rested upon the backs of those denied even the right to their own names. And here in this chamber, you are one of them. Time itself loses meaning in chains. You are 15. At least you think so. Birthdays no longer matter, when every dawn bleeds into the same dread. Hunger gnaws at you, but worse than hunger is anticipation tonight. There will be guests, men who wear the robes of philosophers, the rings of merchants, the wreaths of generals. They will arrive, speaking of art and politics. They will recline on couches and praise the beauty of order, justice, and reason. And then, as the wine flows, they will call for you, for the boy who once ran through olive groves, laughter chasing goats down rocky hills. There is no return. That boy was stolen, bought silenced. Now there is only the property, the nameless body expected to perform before diving deeper into these forgotten stories. Imagine this Greece, the birthplace of democracy, where only a sliver of society truly tasted freedom. Citizens spoke of equality, but only among themselves. Women, foreigners, and slaves, millions across centuries, were excluded, invisible, disposable. It is their voices we strain to hear. Now echoes beneath the stone. And so the door of your cell creaks. Wider light spills across you like a spotlight, harsh and unforgiving. The overseer awaits, and you know there is no choice but to obey. This is where our journey begins. Not in the marble halls, celebrated in textbooks, but in the shadows beneath them. In the chamber of chains, the path to your cell began long before the overseer's footsteps echoed on marble. It began in the silence of drought, in the thin soil of a village that could no longer feed its own. In rural Greece, families lived balanced on a knife's edge, a single bad harvest, an accident that left the father unable to work, or the death of a mother who ground the grain and wove the cloth. Any of these could tip a household into desperation. Debt was not an abstract number on a ledger. It was a predator circling until it found something to devour. Perhaps that was your fate. Perhaps your family owed money to a wealthier landowner. And when the fields withered, there was nothing left to pay. Or perhaps raiders swept through, as they so often did in the endless wars between city-states, seizing the young as spoils. Or maybe it was simpler. You were born beautiful in a world that saw beauty as a commodity to be bought, sold, and consumed. Picture the place where it began, a small farming community nestled between olive groves, houses of mud brick and thatch floors packed with dirt. Single rooms where entire families slept together for warmth. Children ran barefoot, chasing one another between goats and sheep, their laughter mingling with the sound of women grinding barley at the hearth. Life was harsh, but it was life. Then came the drought. Week after week, the sky blazed merciless olive trees, ancient and gnarled, produced only shriveled fruit. The barley fields turned brittle and brown, breaking in the wind like dry bones. Wells that had sustained the village for generations sank to mud. The laughter of children, quieted mothers, measured food with trembling hands. Fathers grew silent, their eyes fixed on the dust. At first, families sold what they could. Their goats, their sheep, their tools. Then came jewelry, a necklace, perhaps passed down from grandmother to mother to daughter, given up for a sack of grain. But once the animals were gone, and the heirlooms spent, the family's gaze shifted inward to the children. When the slave merchants arrived, it was as though vultures had scented death. They rode into the village with ledgers and chains coiled like sleeping serpents. Their promises sounded reasonable, even generous. 20 years of service, they said, in exchange for enough silver to keep a family alive through the winter, a contract, a chance at survival. But you were only 12. Then you didn't understand contracts. You didn't understand service. You only understood the way your father avoided your eyes while negotiating your price. The way your mother turned her face as the merchant pride opened your mouth to inspect your teeth like you were a mule. His hands were rough as he pressed your shoulders, squeezed your arms, tested the muscles of your back. You heard words you didn't know, promising good breeding, suitable for household service. The silver coins clinked as they passed from merchant to father, each one catching sunlight like a tiny sun. Each one a year of your life slipping away. Your father's hand shook, but he took the money. Your mother wept silently into her shawl. And still, they told you lies that it was temporary, that you'd return home one day. Wealthy enough to buy your own land, that you would be treated kindly. Learn skills, perhaps even rise in the household. The lies dripped sweet as honey, but inside them was poison. History tells us that Greek society was built on ideals of freedom, of equality among citizens. But those words excluded you, and thousands like you. Citizens had rights because slaves did not. Democracy flourished because someone else's children were expendable. And so you were LED away. The chains were cold when they closed around your neck. But colder still was the silence from the people you loved most. Silence that said, we have chosen survival for ourselves, at the cost of you. You wanted to scream, but no words came, because even at 12, you sensed the truth. This was not a temporary absence. This was the end of one life and the beginning of another, a life owned by others, and the march toward Athens had only just begun. The journey was not measured in days or miles, but in the weight of iron around your neck. You became part of a caravan, dozens of boys strung together by chains, walking barefoot on stone roads that stretched endlessly toward a city you had never seen. The younger ones cried, at first calling for their mothers, until their voices cracked, until overseers' whips or fists silenced them. The older ones walked in grim silence. They had already learned what you were only beginning to understand. Hope was a luxury more dangerous than hunger. The road cut through landscapes that might have been beautiful under different circumstances. Olive groves shimmered in the sun, their leaves whispering in the breeze. Hills rolled like green waves broken by the sparkle of the Aegean Sea. In the distance, eagles circled above mountain passes. Travelers moved past you, merchants with carts of goods, farmers driving their animals to market, who barely glanced at the line of chained children to them. You were part of the scenery, like pack mules or oxen at night. They drove stakes into the ground and fastened the chains to them. You slept on your side in the dirt, breathing the dust kicked up by the boy chained ahead of you. The sobs of others carried through the darkness, muffled but constant. Each dawn overseers yanked you to your feet, forcing the march to begin again. Visitors sometimes came to inspect the merchandise men with perfumed tunics and jeweled rings walked the line, prodding arms, lifting chins, running hands along shoulders with the casual detachment of farmers inspecting livestock. And slowly you learned to read them, as they read you. There were three kinds of buyers. The first were the agricultural masters. They wanted strength, thick shoulders for ploughing strong legs, for carrying loads, endurance for the back-breaking rhythm of fields and vineyards for them. Your body was a tool, nothing more. The second were the household buyers they searched for, obedience, clever-eyed signs of quick learning. These masters valued Polish and pliability slaves who could blend into the elegant machinery of an urban estate, pouring wine, preparing food, tending to children. And then there was the third kind, the ones you learned to dread most. Of all these men had soft hands but lingering touches. They looked at your face, longer than your muscles, their gaze sliding over you in a way that made your skin crawl. Their interest was not in your strength or intelligence, but in your youth and beauty. They weren't buying workers, they were buying entertainment. As you marched, you began to understand that slavery was not a single fate, but many. Some would toil until their backs broke in fields, others would disappear into kitchens, cellars, or workshops. But for boys like you, the ones whose features made strangers lean in with a certain smile, the future would be different and darker. The irony was cruel in Greek stories. Beauty was celebrated. Statues of athletes painted vases of gods and heroes. Poetry about youthful grace. All proclaimed that beauty was divine. Yet here, chained and barefoot, you learned that in flesh and blood, beauty was a sentence. And as Athens loomed closer, the weight of that sentence grew heavier. The march ended, not with freedom, but with spectacle. Athens, a city whose name would echo across centuries for its democracy, its art, its philosophy. Yet your first memory of it was not marble temples or grand debates. It was the slave market, a place where human beings were reduced to inventory. The assault began with sound, hundreds of voices tangled together. Merchants haggling, buyers calling out bids, auctioneers barking descriptions. Over the din, orders were shouted, chains clinked, whips cracked over it, all the cries of children and the low groans of the defeated wove into a single dissonant chorus. Then came the smell, sweat, fear, and urine. The sour tang of bodies unwashed after weeks on the road, but layered within was something worse. The metallic sharpness of blood and a rancid sweetness that clung to your stomach like rot. And finally sight. You saw them before you, naked bodies arranged in rows, displayed like amphorae in a potter's shop. Old men with bent spines, their muscles slack and value diminished. Women holding infants, children barely old enough to walk, clinging to their skirts, eyes wide and uncomprehending. Boys lined up shoulder to shoulder, stripped bare, so buyers could judge their worth. The merchants had prepared you as they prepared all their wares. They scrubbed you clean, rubbed your skin with olive oil until it gleamed in the sun. Not out of kindness, but because polished merchandise fetched higher prices. The oil made your muscles stand out, turned you into an object of shine, something to be admired, then owned. You were placed apart from those destined for farm labor. Someone had decided your features were too delicate for the fields. You were positioned with the household slaves where beauty was an advantage, not a burden, but you quickly learned that in the eyes of the buyers, beauty was never an advantage. It was a curse. The auctioneer's voice boomed above the crowd. He listed your age, your place of origin, the color of your hair and eyes, the shape of your frame. Each fact stripped you further of selfhood, replacing your identity with a sales pitch. Words like pleasing appearance and gentle temperament drew murmurs of approval from the crowd. Their eyes narrowed, calculating. The bidding began low, then rose quickly. Each offer was a nail in the coffin of your old life, sealing it shut. Men leaned forward with interest, appraising you not as a boy, but as a purchase. Their hands reached out, testing your grip, forcing your mouth open to inspect your teeth, running fingers through your hair as though gauging the fineness of a fabric. You stood frozen, retreating inward, trying to disappear inside yourself. But there was no escape, not from the crowd, not from the auctioneer's voice, not from the final moment when one man's silver outweighed all others. His name, though, you did not know it. Then was Lysander, middle-aged, well-fed his robe, dyed with deep purple. A color reserved for the wealthy, his hands were soft, unused to labor. His smile, satisfied, told you everything. The purchase was already complete in his mind. Even before the coins changed hands, Lysander owned a household in Athens' wealthiest quarter. And now he owned you behind the brilliance of Athens, the Parthenon gleaming in the sun. The philosophers debating in the agora stood transactions like this one. The buying and selling of lives' democracy was spoken of in lofty terms, but only for citizens. Freedom existed because others were chained, and so beneath the shadow of marble temples and the pride of the polis. Your childhood ended with the clink of silver. You were no longer a son, no longer a villager, no longer yourself. You were property, and your new life was about to begin. The city was louder, brighter and harsher than any place you had ever known. Marble columns rose like frozen giants, their white surfaces painted in colors you never imagined. Walls gleamed with mosaics of gods and heroes, scenes from myths that once filled your childhood dreams. But now the gods felt like strangers. They watched from painted tiles with eyes that did not blink, as if silently approving the bargain struck in their name. Lysander's house dwarfed your village. Its entrance was guarded by stone lions, jaws open in eternal roar. Inside servants scurried like shadows, silent, quick, careful, never to meet the gaze of those who passed. The air smelled of roasted meat and expensive wine, so different from the rough barley bread and goat's milk of your home. Every surface spoke of wealth, polished floors, carved furniture, embroidered fabrics. And yet beneath it all, you sensed something colder, like the silence of a tomb disguised as a temple. Demetrius met you at the threshold, the overseer. His presence was heavy, not just because of his size, but because of what he represented, authority sharpened by cruelty. He was a former slave himself, purchased young broken and remade into the master's instrument. His scars told one story, his eyes another. Here was a man who survived by learning how to wield the whip instead of feeling it. He spoke the rules with the rhythm of scripture, each word cutting deeper than the last. You will be fed, twice daily, porridge in the morning, bread and olives in the evening. You will be given clean clothes. Once a week, you will bathe when ordered. You will speak only when spoken to. You will never look a free person directly in the eyes. You will never refuse an order, no matter what that order might be. And then came the final rule, the one that froze your veins. You are here to serve the master and his guests. Demetrius said, his smile twisting like a blade in whatever capacity they require. Your quarters lay beneath the splendor above, down into the basement where corridors narrowed, and the smell of damp stone clung to the air cells line. The walls small and dark, each with a straw mattress, a thin blanket, a chamber pot. Privacy did not exist here. The thick stone muffled sound, not to protect you, but to conceal what happened below, from those who drank wine and spoke of justice. Above the contrast was dizzying, above frescoes of gods, triumphing in battle below. Children trembling in the dark, above the laughter of symposia. Below muffled sobs, pressed into straw to keep from being heard. You were not the first to walk those halls, nor would you be the last. The stones themselves seemed to remember, carrying the weight of countless feet that had marched the same path into captivity. That night, lying on the thin mattress in your cell, you understood the cruel symmetry. The house, like the city itself, was built on contradiction. Beauty masking horror, freedom resting on chains, art covering silence. Athens would be remembered as the cradle of democracy. But for you, and for those locked in the basement, it would forever be the house of chains. The cell was not empty when you entered. Eyes turned toward you, some curious, some hollow, some glinting, with a strange, tired kindness. You were not the first to lie on this straw, and you would not be the last here. Survival was a shared burden, and yet each boy carried his own story like a scar. Marcus was the first to speak. He was close to your age, though his eyes looked older, far older. He had been in the house for 2 years. In his voice was a weight that did not belong to a boy. It belonged to someone who had seen too much. His words were clipped practical. He told you when food would arrive, how to avoid catching Demetrius's attention, which corners of the basement stayed driest when it rained. His kindness was the kind that grew from necessity, not hope. Alexios was older, his body marked with scars that whispered of punishment. He carried himself with the weary movements of a man who had learned to measure every step at night. In hushed tones he told stories, fragments of what happened during symposia. Upstairs his voice never trembled, but his hands sometimes did, curling into fists against the straw when memories became too sharp. And then there was Philemon, barely 14. Yet his face was carved with grief. Well beyond his years, he had once been the son of a merchant family until debts devoured everything, land possessions, even children. He had been here 6 months, long enough to lose the softness of boyhood, but not long enough to harden into stone. It was Philemon who told you the truth, without hiding it, that slaves in this household were not simply servants. They were entertainment in their voices. You began to hear the spectrum of survival. Marcus carried endurance, Alexios carried warning, Philemon carried despair. Each had been broken in different ways, yet all remained alive, bound by invisible threads of shared suffering. Slavery in Greece was not uniform. It carved lives into different shapes. Some were field hands, their backs bent beneath the sun. Others became tutors or craftsmen, their skills exploited for profit. But here in this house of wealth, youth and beauty were the most prized commodities, and that prize was its own curse. The boys welcomed you cautiously, not with celebration, but with recognition they saw in your face what they had once seen in their own reflections. Fear, confusion, the desperate wish to wake from a nightmare that had already become life. Their warnings were not spoken outright, but carried in glances, in silences that stretched too long, in the way they avoided certain words. You lay that night, listening to their breaths in the darkness, each exhale carrying a story that would never be written in marble or inscribed on stone. Historians would speak of Athens, victories, its theatres, its philosophy. They would praise the brilliance of a city that shaped the Western world. But here beneath the painted ceilings, the foundation of that brilliance was misery. And in this misery, you are no longer alone. It began with preparation. On nights when the master hosted guests, Demetrius ordered the younger slaves, bathed buckets of water, poured over your shoulders, cold at first, then warmed by the oil rubbed into your skin until it gleamed like polished bronze. The oil was not for comfort, it was for display. Your body became a surface to be admired, a decoration to please men who measured beauty as if it were another form of currency. They dressed you in thin tunics that clung to your frame fabric, so sheer it concealed nothing. Sometimes golden bracelets or delicate chains were placed on your wrists and neck. Not as gifts, but as ornaments markings that said you were not a worker, but an object of entertainment. The transformation was deliberate, to erase the boy and replace him with a living statue. Part of the room's decoration, then came the symposium in memory. Greek symposia are described as places of wit and philosophy. Men reclining on couches, debating politics, art, and the nature of virtue, the air thick with wine laughter and clever words. And at first, it seemed almost true. Guests arrived in fine robes, speaking of military campaigns, poetry, and the wisdom of Socrates. The room glittered with conversation bowls of fruit trays, of roasted meat, and a fear of wine. But you learned quickly that this sophistication was only a mask. As the night deepened and the wine flowed, the tone shifted, voices grew louder. Arguments, rougher jokes, turned crude laughter, edged with hunger, and always their eyes circled back to you and the others, silent shadows moving between couches, pouring wine-feeding grapes into waiting mouths. The first requests seemed harmless. Pour wine for this guest massage. The shoulders of that one sing a song from your homeland. Each act might have been innocent, if not for the weight of their gazes. The lingering touches, the way conversation dimmed. Whenever one of you approached, you began to feel the change in the air before it happened, like the heaviness before a storm. Then the moment arrived. One guest, his beard flecked with grey, beckoned you to his couch. His voice was smooth, his smile warm as he invited you to sit beside him. He asked where you were from, whether you missed your home, whether you were treated well. His hand rested on your shoulder, light at first, then firmer. It slid lower as he spoke, his questions blurring into commands you tried to pull away. But his grip tightened, laughter rippled across the room. Other guests leaned in, watching their eyes gleaming with cruel delight. Your protests meant nothing. Your protests meant nothing. Your struggle was entertainment. The philosophy of the symposium had reached its true conclusion. What followed that night carved itself into your memory like a wound that never healed. Not just the violation itself, but the indifference surrounding it, the laughter, the casual way your body was treated as a stage for their amusement. The philosophers who spoke of justice by day became predators by night. Men who debated virtue treated you like an object, a tool, a toy. Afterwards, you lay on the straw of your cell, staring at the ceiling of rough stone. Your body ached, but it was your spirit that bled. The boy who once believed in gods and heroes had vanished in his place. Was something else, a vessel emptied of self, Filled with silence, the symposium would continue again and again, each one repeating the same ritual. The mask of culture, the descent into cruelty, the laughter that drowned out your pain. History remembers Athens as a city of brilliance, but brilliance in those rooms was nothing more than the sheen of oil on a child's skin gleaming beneath torchlight. Resistance was instinct, but here, instinct was punished. Marcus had once tried to run. He lasted only a day before being dragged back. His body torn by lash marks, his spirit nearly crushed for weeks. He limped through the corridors, each step a reminder of what freedom cost. Alexios, older and harder, once refused an order at a symposium. Demetrius chained him in the courtyard for 3 days, without food, without water, exposed to the sun by day and the chill by night. His cracked lips and hollow eyes became a living warning to the rest of you. Some punishments scarred the body, but the more dangerous ones scarred the mind. Isolation was the overseer's sharpest weapon. Days alone in a dark cell. No voices, no light. Only your own thoughts unraveling into whispers. When finally released, you staggered out grateful, even for cruelty, because cruelty at least was contact. Then came unpredictability, the constant uncertainty of when you might be summoned, what would be demanded, how severe the punishment might be for the smallest misstep. A tray spilled, a glance held too long, a breath taken at the wrong moment, all could spark a storm. The fear seeped into your bones until your body flinched before your mind even registered danger, and perhaps the most insidious cruelty of all, the destruction of identity. The name your parents gave you was stripped away, replaced with something softer, exotic, more pleasing to Greek ears speaking. Your native tongue was forbidden, your words, your songs, your memories were crimes. The tunics you wore, the food you ate, the gods you were forced to honor piece by piece, they dismantled the boy you had been and built a hollow vessel in his place. Soon you understood that the overseers didn't just want obedience, they wanted surrender, not only of your body, but of your very sense of self. In this, they mirrored the broader structure of Greek society. To citizens, slaves were not merely property. They were a different category of being the philosophers who wrote about virtue, the politicians who spoke of justice, the artists who carved gods from marble. All of them drew a line between citizen and slave. Human and not human, to treat you cruelly was not a betrayal of their ideals. It was their ideal in practice. The system worked because it broke people in stages first, with fear, then with uncertainty, and finally with erasure. And yet even in that breaking small fragments of resistance glimmered a whispered word in your mother tongue. A song hummed too softly for overseers to hear a shared glance that said, "I see you. You are still yourself." But resistance came at a cost for every act of defiance. There was punishment for every whisper. There was silence forced upon another. Slowly, you learned the lesson they wanted burned into your marrow. Survival required not fighting, but folding the boy who once belonged to a village, who once ran among goats, and olive groves was fading. In his place grew something the household preferred. A shadow trained to anticipate, to flinch, to serve and still, deep inside. The smallest ember of self remained the men who came to Lysander's house, were the pillars of Athens. Their names would be etched into history, remembered as builders of democracy, defenders of justice, patrons of art. Yet within those marble halls, their masks slipped, revealing appetites as dark as the cellars beneath their city. Dionysus was one of them, a politician praised for his speeches on civic virtue, justice, and the rights of citizens. On the assembly floor, he thundered about fairness and duty. But in the symposium, his pleasure lay in humiliation. He forced young slaves to crawl on hands and knees while he quoted passages from Homer, twisting poetry into a weapon of shame. The man who embodied justice in public became a tormentor in private. Cleomenes was another, a wealthy merchant. His name was sung in the agora for his generosity. He funded public works, donated grain during famine, and clothed the poor, but his true indulgence was violence in Lysander's house. He used pain as his philosophy, claiming it taught slaves their natural place. His blows left scars, not only on bodies, but on the lie of his reputation to Athens. He was a benefactor to you. He was a predator, and perhaps most disturbing of all was the sophist, a philosopher whose writings on ethics would be copied and studied for generations. He spoke of virtue, of moderation, of the good life. But when wine loosened his tongue and darkness cloaked the symposium, he turned those same arguments into justifications for cruelty to him. Slaves were outside the circle of morality. He could wound, degrade, and destroy without contradiction, because in his mind you were never fully human. This was not hypocrisy in their eyes. It was structure. Citizens believed that morality applied only to equals. Justice was for those with voices in the assembly. Philosophy was for those free to contemplate it. Slaves, women, foreigners, all stood outside the walls of their ethical world. For them, cruelty was not a violation of principle. It was the principle. The contradiction that shocks us now did not shock them. Then the same city that raised temples to Athena, goddess of wisdom, normalized the breaking of children in basements. The same society that invented democracy excluded the majority of its population from it. Their brilliance shone only because someone else lived in shadow. And so in Lysander's house, you served men whose names would outlive them. Men remembered as guardians of justice, patrons of philosophy, voices of reason, but you knew their truth. You saw their eyes when they leaned in, heard their laughter when you cried, felt their hands when they proved their theories of power upon your skin. History would remember them as great. You would remember them as monsters. Time-blurred days no longer marched forward. They bled together. Indistinguishable survival was not measured in weeks or months, but in the small calculations that kept you alive through each night. You learned quickly that resistance was fire. It burned bright, but it burned out fast to survive. Meant something colder, quieter. It meant surrendering outwardly while building walls inside yourself. It meant becoming a ghost. You trained yourself to read signs the way farmers once read clouds, a guest's posture, the twitch of a hand, the slur in a voice. Each detail told you what mood was about to unfold, what punishment or cruelty might be demanded. Anticipation became instinct. A well-timed bow of the head, a perfectly filled cup of wine. A silence held just long enough. All of these could mean the difference between a night of bruises and a night of survival. But each small concession chipped away at something essential. The more you adapted, the less you remained the boy from the mountain village who once ran laughing through olive groves, grew fainter with each passing month. In his place emerged a figure who moved with downcast eyes, shoulders curved in submission, voice flattened into obedience. The change was not only in your body, it seeped into your thoughts. You found yourself calculating moods, even when no threat was present. A loud sound made you flinch. A hand raised in greeting made your chest tighten. Gratitude twisted into strange shapes, relief when a guest ignored you. Joy when an overseer's blow landed softer than expected. You began to mistake absence of cruelty for kindness. This was the system's greatest triumph, not breaking your body, but teaching you to break yourself. You no longer needed a whip at your back. You carried the whip inside your mind, policing your own, every word, every gesture, every breath. Yet even in this death of self-fragments of resistance lingered in the quiet of the basement. Marcus sometimes shared a scrap of food. Alexios murmured a joke, too dark to repeat aloud. Philemon whispered fragments of songs from his mother's village. These moments did not undo the breaking, but they reminded you that the breaking was not yet complete. And so you became two people, the ghost who moved through Lysander's house, silent and compliant, and the amber deep inside, hidden where no overseer could reach. Most days the ghost prevailed, but sometimes only. Sometimes the amber flickered, reminding you that once you had been alive, years past, you became what they wanted. A model slave, a body that obeyed before words were spoken. Demetrius noticed, and soon you were made to accompany him to the markets. There you stood, as proof of what proper training could achieve the irony. Cut deep once you had trembled on the auction platform, oil shining on your skin as buyers appraised you like livestock. Now you stood beside Demetrius, watching him inspect other boys, the same way. His questions were technical. His eyes precise, which one would enjoy the fields, which had the temperament for household service, which showed the delicate features that pleased symposium guests. Sometimes he asked your opinion, and you gave it, because silence was more dangerous. You heard yourself speaking in the same detached tones merchants had once used on you. That one will resist too much. This one is already broken. That one shows promise for long service. The words tasted like ash, but they came anyway. And then one day you saw him a boy, no older than 13, his hair dark, like yours had once been, his eyes wide with the same fear that had filled yours when the chains first closed around your neck. He was smaller than the others, wiry with the strength of hard labor. But his gaze darted everywhere, searching desperately for kindness, for safety, for home. In that instant, something inside you cracked the ghost. You had become faltered, and for a heartbeat, you were that boy again. Barefoot in the olive groves, laughing free. You staggered, and Demetrius's hand shot out to steady you. The heat, you muttered, your voice hollow, but the truth was deeper. Seeing him had awakened something you thought long dead. The ache of being human, the boy was purchased by another household. You did not see him again, but his face haunted you. A mirror held up to the life you had lost at night in your cell. You dreamed of your father's laugh, your mother's cook in the wind over mountain pastures, dreams you had buried long ago, dangerous dreams. It was Marcus who gave you the shard. One night, he pressed the small piece of metal into your palm. Crude, sharpened, hidden, keep it. He whispered, use it if you must. He didn't explain, he didn't need to. The shard meant choices, rare, forbidden choices. It could open locks. It could pierce flesh. It could end your life before another man's hands did. For the first time in years, you held something that was yours alone. Not a gift, not a command, not an order, a choice. That night, you lay awake, the shard warm in your fist. You thought of escape, of revenge, of ending everything in a single decisive act. Each possibility burned through you like fire. Yet when dawn came, you hid it carefully where other slaves might find it, because perhaps it wasn't only your choice. Perhaps it was a seed of hope meant to be passed along to remind someone, anyone, that chains did not erase every possibility. For the first time in years, you remembered what it felt like to decide it came without ceremony. One morning, Demetrius summoned you to his quarters. His tone was flat business, like as though he were reading an entry from a ledger. Your value in the household had declined. He explained the guest barely noticed you anymore. Newer boys with fresh beauty drew their eyes. You ate more than you earned, and so you would be sold. Not to another household, not to a field, but to the mines. Everyone knew what that meant. The mines were not a punishment. Not exactly. They were an end, a place where bodies were consumed as efficiently as or few returned from them, and those who did were shells, coughing broken their skin grey with dust in Athens. The mines at Laurium glistened with silver, fueling the empire's navy, paying for temples, financing the golden age of philosophy. The brilliance of the Parthenon was carved from the lungs of slaves. You accepted the news with the numbness that had become your shield. What difference did it make death in Lysander's house, or death in the mines? Both were certain. Yet still something shifted in you, as chains were fastened once again around your wrists. The road to the mines wound through landscapes that stirred memories. Mountain paths where you once chased goats as a child. Streams where your bare feet had splashed laughing villages that could have been your own, where children played in the dust while mothers called them inside for supper. Every sight was a knife, twisting in the wound of memory. But this time, you did not imagine escape. You knew better. Guards marched alongside with whips and spears, eyes trained to catch even the flicker of rebellion. The chains were too heavy, the distance too great. Instead, you used the journey to say goodbye. You memorized the way eagles rode the wind above the cliffs, the smell of pine trees bending in the breeze, the way wildflowers burst stubbornly through cracks of stone. You stored them inside, knowing they might be the last living things you would ever see. The mining camp was worse than rumor. Rows of crude shelters clung to the edge of blackened pits. Hundreds of slaves moved like shadows, bent under sacks of ore, coughing clouds of dust into the air. Children too small for picks carried baskets until their backs warped. Men, blinded by darkness, fumbled through tunnels that trembled under their own weight. The air was thick with the metallic sting of silver, the grit of stone. The choking dryness of dustwork began before dawn and ended only when exhaustion collapsed you into the dirt. Food was meager, water scarce, as still the overseers cared nothing for the lives beneath them. Slaves were cheaper to replace than to preserve. Collapse was constant. Each shift carried the possibility that the tunnel would grow and splinter and crush everyone inside. Death came quickly, then for others, it came slowly. Lungs filling with dust, skin splitting with sores, muscles unraveling with each load carried from the depths. And yet, even in this circle of hell, something remarkable endured. The slaves here had built a kind of hidden society. They shared scraps of food, whispered stories during rest breaks, taught one another songs from distant lands. They remembered names that their masters tried to erase in the darkest tunnels they carved. Small marks into the stone symbols of villages, crude faces, fragments of forgotten gods, proof that they had lived, that they had been more than property. And now you were one of them. The boy who once belonged to Lysander's house, who once served at symposia, who once learned to survive by becoming a ghost, was now simply another shadow in the mind. Another body swallowed by darkness, so that Athens might shine in the sun in the mines. Time lost meaning. The days were measured only in the rhythm of picks against stone, the cough of dust-clogged lungs, the weight of baskets filled with ore. Sleep brought no rest, only shallow breaths and aching bones. Your body, already worn from years of service in Lysander's house, began to falter. Old wounds ached in the cold joints, stiffened, a hollow cough rattled your chest. You knew what it meant. The mines did not forgive weakness. Yet even here, death was not solitude. The others did not let you vanish into silence when you faltered. Someone shared a crust of bread when you collapsed. Hands pulled you from the tunnel before it sealed shut, when you gasped for breath in the choking dust. A boy placed a wet rag over your mouth to ease the burning in this place, designed to consume you. The only thing that endured was solidarity. And when the end came, it was quiet. No lash, no symposium, no cruel laughter, only exhaustion. Your lungs blackened, from stone dust surrendered. Your body starved and scarred, gave out. You lay in the darkness, surrounded by men who had once been strangers, but had become your only family. They promised to remember your name, though history would not. They whispered your story, so it would live on, carried from mouth to mouth, tunnel to tunnel, long after your breath was gone. Because in a world that tried to erase you, memory was resistance. Your story was not unique. It was one among thousands, perhaps millions, for every marble column, for every gleaming temple, for every word of philosophy carved into history. There were voices silenced in basements, cries swallowed by stone children, worked to death in mines. Athens' golden age was paid for in the currency of human lives. And though centuries have passed, the echo of those lives still lingers. It lingers in the questions we ask today, in the parallels we cannot ignore. For the systems of cruelty did not vanish. They evolved. Children still vanish into trafficking networks. Families still sell sons and daughters under the weight of debt. Industries still profit from bodies treated as disposable. The faces have changed. The languages have changed. The excuses have grown more sophisticated, but the structure, the turning of some people's suffering into others' comfort remains constant. The boy whose story we followed died in a mine. His name lost to the dust, but his voice survives in the silence, between history's lines, in the shadows beneath marble and gold. It is timeless, and so the question remains, whispered across centuries. Will we remember only the brilliance of civilization, or will we also remember its cost? Because the marble halls still echo with his cries. The mosaics still conceal the stains of innocent blood, and somewhere even now, another child walks the same road of chains.